All right. Morning, everybody. We'll dive right in. So remember, what we had talked about is these opening verses talking about consider it pure joy when you endure all these trials of various and different kinds, because it builds resilience, and then that builds hope, and then finally then the expectation of joy. So we talked about that. And now we're moving into the new section, what is wisdom? Did we move into this already? Or no?
If you look at the calendar, I put what slide we were on. My thing is.
Oh no, I gotta look at the calendar real quick again. Like on the.
I had what slide we were on.
I'm sorry, I forgot to.
No.
Mark it down. I didn't have it.
I had it marked down, but I forgot to bring it back with me. On this garage door, so I remember to bring it.
Stop it. Okay, there we are. Boy, I should have done this ahead of time, shouldn't I? That's okay. When we go.
If only we had time.
Yeah. If only we didn't have an hour plus. I should have.
Or that extra 2 minutes, which is.
Yeah, I don't see where it is. Okay, if nobody remembers, we'll just pick it up here. So what is wisdom? What is wisdom? Did we talk about the difference between Eastern wisdom and Western wisdom? Yeah, we did, didn't we?
Yeah.
We did. Okay, that's where we are. So let's do some review, because I'm sure you guys all remember it perfectly. He said sarcastically. What is the difference between Western wisdom and Eastern? And when I say Eastern, I don't mean like Indian or Chinese or Japanese. I mean Eastern in the sense of Semitic, Jewish Aramaic. That's the idea. So what's the difference between the two, typically speaking? Oh, nobody remembers. Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. Okay. So Western wisdom, typically speaking, is concerned with big thoughts. Okay. Eastern wisdom is concerned with big actions. It's does it walk, not does it talk. Okay. So now if you want examples of this, if you'd like homework, because I know you guys all love homework, you're thinking to yourself, if only I had more homework, you can go and read the book of Proverbs. And those are like hundreds of examples of Eastern wisdom. And the idea then is these are things that are tried and tested and true. And I gave some examples of that last time. So for example, one man stands up and what he says is good until the next guy stands up. Okay, so some of them are kind of funny. Wounds from a friend can heal. I like that one too. So there's a home. So the one I have on my office door in my office is the furnace for gold, the smelter for silver or iron. I think it's iron, but the Lord for your soul. And what's the idea about that? Gold and silver, those and bronze, they get melted and purified. Well, what's the thing? What's the one that melts down and purifies our souls? The Lord. And when you understand that, you go, ouch. It's the same sort of picture that Jesus has with the vineyard. I am the vine, you are the branches. If a branch remain in me, you will bear much fruit. And the vineyard dresser, he cuts off, he prunes. Ouch. Okay. So all of these proverbs, and the idea then these are tried and tested and true, and the difficulty with them is not that they're always hard to. Some are a little weird. We don't exactly know what to make of them. I just want to be very honest about that. The vast majority of them are pretty straightforward, and the problem is not that they're hard to understand; they're hard to do. Right? Western wisdom is like deep thoughts and calculus level thinking sort of stuff, which is important. So I don't want us to think that one is better than the other, but the focus for the book of James is going to be far more Eastern wisdom than Western religion. Okay, so I got the question up here. Which is true wisdom, knowing the truth or doing the truth?
Last week I said both.
You did? Did I mark you wrong? No. Okay. So yeah, this is one of those sneaky curveball pastor questions. The answer is yes, both. Okay. Because in order to do the truth, what do you have to have first?
Knowledge.
Aha. Okay, so it's sneaky, right? So we don't want to say that one is better than the other, but there is a point to that, right? Okay, so let's go back and maybe just read the verses again. So verses 5 to 11. Loading, loading, loading. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded, unstable in all they do. Believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position, but the rich should take pride in their humiliation, since they will pass away like a wild flower. For the sun rises with scorching heat and withers the plant, its blossoms fall, and its beauty is destroyed. In the same way, the rich will fade away, even while they go about their business. Okay, so that's the context there. We'll go back to our questions. In verse 5, then, what warning does James give to us in verse 5? What warning does he give to us? Verse 5. Oh, no, I remember there was a typo there. The warning is, what invitation is there in verse 5? There was a typo there. What invitation is there in verse 5? Yeah. Very practical question. When's the last time you prayed for wisdom?
Yesterday.
Yeah, so it might be, for some of you, it might be yesterday. It might be one of those, oh, that's kind of been a while, hasn't it? By the way, this is one of these reasons that there's nothing wrong with having your own prayers that you pray from the heart. We do that a lot. But there also is a value to read someone else's prepared prayers. And this is one of them. You start to go, oh, I hadn't thought about that. That'd be a good thing to pray for as well. Okay, but to pray for wisdom. And when we pray for wisdom, what's God's response?
It will be given.
Yeah. This is one of these, he's going to shower that wisdom on us. Generously, without finding fault, it will be given to you. Generously. So these are words to, a lot of the statements in James are so small that each of them is worthy of, like, you want to take it, write it down, and put it on your fridge to stare at it for an entire week, and then move on to the next verse. That's a beautiful statement when you think about it. Pray, because God gives generously. In the next verse, then, there's a warning. What's the warning, though? Yeah. You have to believe, A, that he can actually do what he says, and then also, when you get the wisdom, not doubt. Yikes. Last week, I think I asked the question, can you think of someone who had this sort of flip-floppy sort of version of faith? Can you think of, well, there's, I suppose, more than one example. I had one in my brain, but if you can think of one, that's fine too. Who are people who had like flip-floppy versions of faith?
I was thinking Gideon, the whole don't
Oh.
test the Lord and stuff.
Yeah.
But God knew that he needed the confidence or he wasn't going to go in.
Yeah, it's a beautiful part of the Bible there with Gideon, where the Lord, the fancy word is condescends. Now, we use that in our own language, in modern language, to say, like, I'm looking down on you. No, the idea is he comes down to our level. And that's what the Lord does. And Gideon desires a sign, and the Lord gives it to him, But then he also doubts and flip-flops. And of course, later on in his life, he makes all the idols and stuff, and it goes from bad to worse. But nonetheless, in the middle stage, he's this, Good example. Any other examples? I'll accept that one.
Jacob?
Jacob would be a decent example too. There's the, we went through the book of Genesis there in those evening Bible studies, and here you have a guy, Jacob in Genesis, who gets through life by He's the huckster, he's the thief, he's the conniver. He gets through life by the power of his own intelligence and his own graft. He's a grifter. And then, so what is the Lord's solution? What do you do with a problem like Jacob? Well, you send him up to Laban. And Laban's like 10 times more of a grifter than Jacob is. And he's forced then to figure out, am I going to trust in my own ingenuity to get out of this jam, or in the Lord? And at the end of 20 years, then, one of my favorite parts of the Bible, when he comes back and he has two camps, and he is wrestling with the Lord, and he says, after he says, look at this, I got two camps, and all I had with me as I was coming north was a stick. And I got so many, I got two. And then he says, I am not worthy of all the kindnesses you've shown me. He would have never said that 20 years before that. Okay, but in those middle stages, flip-floppiness, or a double-mindedness, to use the word here. Great examples. I mean, the one I was thinking of was just simply there was the guy that went to Jesus to have his son healed, which is to say the demon driven out of his son. And he made the mistake of saying, teacher. Jesus never likes it when you call him teacher. You can kind of find that pattern. Whenever anyone calls him teacher, Jesus gets angry. Because most of the time they thought he was just a teacher. But nonetheless, he says, teacher, if you are able, can you drive out my son? And what's Jesus? There's a pretty in-depth textual variant there. But most likely the response that Jesus gives there is, if I am able. And what's finally then when Jesus pushes against him and says, if I am able, what does the man say? Lord, yeah. Oh, and what I love about that then is that hits us where we are in our everyday lives. And that's what James is doing here. He's saying, the simple statement is ask for wisdom. Oh, yeah, that sounds great. But when you ask it, actually expect that you're going to get what you want. And notice then the beautiful picture that he uses, the anchor then, or rather it's the lack of an anchor. I don't do a whole lot with sailing and what have you, but I do remember when I worked at a camp and we had a lake and sometimes it was windy, and one of the frustrating things is when you have the boat and then the wind pushes the boat like toward the shore, and then you're trying so hard to get the thing pushed out from the shore a tiny bit or whatever, so you can figure out what you're doing, and it just goes psh, 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 and then it becomes dangerous after a while, right? How much worse, the bigger the boat, the bigger waves, the bigger the wind, right? And then the result is, if you pray for wisdom and don't really trust the Lord can give it, what are you going to get then in response? Not a whole lot, right? You're not going to get that wisdom. Simple, but double-minded and unstable in all they do. Okay. Now, again, this is going to hit us where it hurts. This moves us then to repent. That we're going to say, just like the dad did, Lord, I believe, help me in my unbelief. Right. Okay. And then now notice how he circles back. James does this a lot. If it's worth mentioning once, it's worth mentioning a half a dozen times. So what group of people does he go after boldly and bluntly here in the second paragraph? The rich. There's a lot of one of the scholars or commentators, he talked about God's upside down kingdom. Mm-hmm. And the idea then is, in the world, the people who are rich are seen as being amazing. And we should follow them and do what they do and listen to them. But the people who are poor, that's kind of the response. And James, he just bluntly goes after them. He says, don't take pride in your, but the rich should take pride in their humiliation. So notice the irony there. They should take pride in their humiliation, lowliness. Why? Because they're going to pass away like wildflowers. Okay, and then he gives the example then from the Old Testament, and then you're going to fade away. And who's going to remember you after you're nobody? I've spoken about this before, but we were in Pittsburgh for 10 years, and you have these huge giants, financially speaking, from 100 years ago. Like the history on this stuff is just fascinating because there's only like, I don't know, half a dozen at the most, a dozen families, and they owned like the vast majority of the entire stock market. It's just a handful of families. You know, Rockefeller, Carnegie, Mellon. I'm trying to think of some of these others. Just giant. And my favorite was, I think it was Rockefeller, because they had a son who, I mean, at the same time that the guy owned maybe, I don't know, a tenth, a quarter of the entire stock market, he had his son wear his older sister's dress for the first couple of years of his life, because why? It wasn't worn out yet. You know, I guess he didn't wear anything. Yeah, you know, so the you know, now their names are on everything in Pittsburgh, but does anyone have a clue who they are? No, nobody. Okay, and sometimes we forget that. Okay, all right, we talked about that. Oh, yeah. So let's talk about. We'll read the couple verses here from Matthew. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, "You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment." But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, "Raka," anyone ever told you what does Raka mean? No? One of those, it's just a word stuck in there. So reik in Hebrew is the idea for empty, and this is the Aramaic, so Raka, empty person. When I was a kid, it was like, I don't know what, it was fashionable for you to make fun of someone else by calling them an airhead. An airhead. Same idea, but it's very pejorative, evidently. So again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, "Raka," empty head, is answerable to the court. The idea then is, I mean, you have to go to court. You're going to be, you know, and anyone who says, "You fool," will be in danger of the fire of hell. So, so first of all, notice what kind of. So we talked before about parallelism. Do you guys remember those? You have the three types of parallelism. Synonymous, which is the same. Antithetical, which is plus, minus, whether good, bad, or bad, good. And then you finally have the third example, synthetic, which is on the wall there, Mark. Oh, okay. All right. Is it on the wall here anywhere? No, you can't cheat. When Priscilla was here the last time, I asked the question. I think it was the three uses of the law. And I was wondering why she was staring at the wall when she answered. And I'm like, "Do you want to make eye contact?" And then she was like reading it off the wall. And I'm like, "Well done. You remember that word for word." And she's like, you know. Anyway, the third one is synthetic. More. This to this. Now, whether it goes from good to better or bad to worse, it's so what of those three different versions of parallelism, which one is this? You have heard it said, now I say to you.
The second one.
Is it talking about opposites? So this is the tricky one. It's the third group.
Okay.
So he's amplifying it. So in other words, so murder, bad, right? And what the Pharisees and others, but what the Pharisees had done is they said, you know, I'm keeping the fifth commandment. Why? Because I haven't whacked my neighbor with a 2x4. I'm pretty good when it comes to the fifth commandment, right? And Jesus says, no. How so? Anyone who murders, but I tell you, anyone who is angry with his brother or sister, amplifying the amount of sin that you're actually culpable for, guilty of, you know, available to fall into. Right? So and what he's doing then is he's not doing anything new. What he's doing is, he's bringing the people back on track to what the Bible actually says. It's often been said, if you want to get to heaven, Professor Kuski used to put it this way. He would say, don't tell people that they can't get to heaven on their own. What? He said, no, you got to walk through the paces with them. He said, tell them there is a way you can get to heaven on your own. What do you have to do that, though?
Perfect.
Yeah, be perfect all the time from the moment you're conceived to the moment you die. That's the one small thing you have to do. So be patient with them. And then he said, don't be surprised then that what they do with God's law, with the Ten Commandments, is they lift themselves up, letting people know that they're more awesome than they are, and they also pull down the wall so they can jump over. And this would be one of those examples where they're pulling down the wall, right? I haven't killed anybody, so therefore I'm keeping the fifth commandment, right? And Jesus says, no, I tell you the truth, whoever hates his brother is a murderer. Okay, it's the same one. Anyone who says to his brother Raka. So the idea there is this would be like eighth commandment stuff, the reputation of your neighbor. Okay, but also then the thoughts we have against our neighbor. Okay, so I mentioned that because we're going to find a lot of that structure then here in the book of James over and over and over again. Okay, so we see the parallelism here. Okay. Also then there's another figure of speech here, hyperbole. What's hyperbole? Nobody remembers. I love my figures of speech. By the way, I love them not because they're fun, not just because they're fun. They are fun. I'm taking my counseling classes and we have to write technical papers and I'm not allowed to use figures of speech.
Whoops.
And I told the professor, I said, that hurts. That really hurts. You can't use any poetic language. And I said, all right, you can take that away, but you're not going to take away hendiadys from me. So hendiadys is where you have two words to make one point. Clear and concise, right? That's two words that kind of basically mean the same thing. And I said, you can take all of that away, but I'm keeping them. You can't take hendiadys away from me. And then she laughed and she said, okay, you can keep that. What's hyperbole? Another figure of speech. It's exaggeration for effect. Okay. So Jesus, we're also going to hear Jesus, for example, in the Beatitudes and other places say, if your hand causes you to sin, what are you supposed to do with your hand? If your eye causes you to sin, what are you supposed to do? Yeah. How do we know at a very practical level that that's hyperbole, exaggeration for effect? I mean, sometimes I make you overthink it. Yeah. How many of the disciples, like when you get to the book of Acts and they go on their missionary journeys, where Jesus sends them out and then he also commissions a whole lot of guides for them because they're blind? Do they have a whole lot of seeing eye dogs? And there's not a hint of that. So that's hyperbole. And of course, we get the point then is whether it's your hands or your eyes, to stop it at the beginning and be aware of it. Okay, so you have these figures of speech then. Okay. Okay. How is James doing the same thing in these words when it comes to true wisdom, between the contrast between rich and poor? Okay. Let me go back to, there it is. So rich and poor. Notice the hyperbole going on then, the exaggeration. The rich should take pride in their humiliation. So I want to lay the foundation. We're going to get to, James loves hyperbole. He loves to overspeak. Luther loved hyperbole, which is why it's tough to read Luther, because sometimes you don't know where he's going. You don't know if he's exaggerating or not. Okay, James loves hyperbole, and so I want to lay the foundation, because we're going to get to a part in the next chapter, I think it is, when he flat out calls them murderers. Now, do we conclude that they were quite literally murderers in the sense they were killing people? No, but the point is they had in their hearts a murderous motive, and they were carrying that through with their their lips and their actions. So they hadn't murdered anyone that we know of, but it was there. And so there's this hyperbole, this exaggeration that flows then. Okay. All right. I think we talked about that. Let's move on. Trials and temptations. Do we got more? So 12 to 15. We'll go ahead and read these. Do I have more trials and temptations? So notice then, another one of the things that we're just not used to is circular thought, right? So how would you put it? See, what we're used to when we talk about sharing thoughts is you have a thesis, right? And then you have point 1, and then you have point 2, and then you have point 3. Okay? And then what do you do if your people have been sleeping through your entire sermon? What do? You repeat your thesis at the end. Okay? Clear communication, right? And just so we're clear, that's Western thought. Paul writes this way. In Romans 1 to 3, what's the train of thought in Romans 1 to 3? You're all sinners. You're all slaves to sin. In two groups, those who know God's word and those who don't. You're all sinners. Chapters 1 to 3. Chapters 4 to 6, in Christ, you're all forgiven. And so then he stacks up all of these logical reasons underneath. So that's very Paul-like. In Jewish society, it's not quite that way. How does it work in Jewish society? The train of thought is going to go like this. Okay, they're going to pick up a thought and then repeat it. Okay, and it's a spiral. And notice I have it up. It's not a downward spiral, upward spiral. We're making progress, right? We've already heard that trials and temptations are things we want to rejoice at. And then he sets that aside. And then what does he come back to? Trials and temptations. Okay, a very, very Eastern thing. Now, what is even more perplexing is that you'd think, oh, okay, I'm with you so far. We're going to be talking, we're going to circle back to trials and temptations a number of times. But what also is a theme that he's been harping on and bringing up a number of times already? Rich and poor. Yeah, maybe I stole your thunder, Carol. Rich and poor. And what's tough about that, though, is we go like this as if it's parallel, but really what does it look like? It looks like this. Oh, no. It's all smashed in the middle. Okay. Very Eastern. Very Eastern. We would have a hard time, if I were preaching a sermon like this, you would have a hard time following. Who knows, maybe I do. And you're like, well, that other one, that was kind of, maybe I have sermons like that. But I want to let you know, just train of thought, what's going on, because we don't really approach these things in the West this way. So I just want to give you a heads up about that. All right,